Little and Broken, but Still Good, by Wicked Writer on AO3. Chapter 16. Once the new school year started up again, Hisashi found himself quickly falling into a new routine. Normally after work, he'd go home and hibernate until he had to return. And on the weekends, if Nomuri wasn't available, he'd become recluse, only stepping out to go for a run before locking himself inside, waiting for Monday again. Rarely did he go out the past few years. But now with Shouta and his family in the picture, he would end up being invited over for dinner on Friday, and find he wouldn't come back home until Sunday. He even started storing some clothes in a drawer in Shota's room. It took a bit of time to get used to being over there, but found that on the weekends he wasn't able to come over for some reason. He'd miss them all. Eri would usually wave at him in his room whenever her new class passed by in the halls, especially in the week that followed his absence in the Aizawa household. It was very sweet, and luckily for him, no one thought to ask about it. Most other colleagues just assumed she wanted to say hi to her favorite teacher from her previous year. It wasn't as if Hisashi was trying to hide his relationship with Shouta. He would gladly tell anyone about it if they asked. But there was a little worry in the back of his mind that someone would try and use it to get him fired or something. Not that they would be able to, but sometimes adults are cruel and they end up hurting kids in the process. Hisashi didn't want anything to be directed towards Eri over this. A little over 2 months into the new school year, Hisashi was finishing up some tasks in the classroom when Shouta texted, asking if he wanted to come over for dinner. Of course, he accepted, and hurried over as soon as he was done. Luckily, the train ride was smooth, and before he knew it, he was standing outside of Shota's apartment, looking down at the newly acquired key. Shouta gave him the house key about a week ago, saying he wanted Hisashi to have it in case of emergencies. This was far from an emergency, but the text he received on the way over told him that Shouta would be cooking, and Hitoshi had a friend over, so it would probably be easiest to use his key and let himself in. It felt odd, opening the door and walking into the apartment he normally waited for someone to invite him into. But it wasn't a bad odd. Definitely something he could get used to. Shouta had his hands full, washing some vegetables, but looked up and smiled when he came in. "Honey, I'm home," Hisashi said in a sing-song voice, making Shouta chuckle. "You always work this late on Friday night?" "Sometimes." Hisashi shrugged, before taking off his jacket and placing it on the coke rack by the door, before Eri had a chance to run out of her room, which would happen at any second when she realized he was here. Hisashi moved into the kitchen to give Shouta a kiss. He melted into it, allowing his stress of the week to disappear as he lost himself on Shota's lips. At that time, he heard a door open, and the unmistakable patter-pitter of feet running out. Eri smiled at seeing Hisashi, latching onto his leg in a hug. "It's so good to see you too, little one." Hisashi ruffled her hair a little, making her giggle. "Are you staying the weekend again? I want to see a movie, and Daddy said we could all go together if you want." "I'd love to." "Yay!" Eri literally jumped for joy. "And we can play dollies when Dad cooks." She ran back down the hallway into her room, probably to grab whatever she was playing with before. "I can tell her you need some rest first. You just got off of work." Shouta leaned against Hisashi. "Nah, I'm better at keeping her entertained than cooking, so worry about dinner, and I've got it." He kissed Shouta once more before moving to the couch where Eri was already starting to arrange her toys. He paid attention to whatever made-up rules Eri created for this game, although he was distracted a little every time he heard Shouta move about in the kitchen. While he was thankful for being taken in so fully by this family, he really wanted to just curl up in Shota's arms and take a nap to recover from the week. Sometimes they were able to, but most often one of their attentions was pulled to Eri. Rarely with Hitoshi, but he started opening up a little more. Most often during the sessions where Hisashi was teaching him to play guitar, he would end up making some comment that would turn the conversation elsewhere. Usually it always hovered around school. Hisashi made sure to make it known that he cared for Hitoshi just as much as he cared for Eri. He would give the young boy advice around studying habits or how to balance the amount of homework he got. But sometimes the conversation would go a little deeper. Once, after he was ecstatic at almost being able to finish playing an entire song, he talked about how he always wanted to learn an instrument, but his father never allowed it. He always had an excuse of it being too expensive, or he'll get bored of it after a week, so why bother? Hitoshi said he was thankful for them, taking him in and believing in him, since no one else ever did. Before he could tear up, Hisashi wrapped him in a hug. Now they seemed to be a little family, and Hisashi thought he should have panicked. It was much too soon for it to be feeling like this, but something told him this was alright. So he accepted them, and hoped they would accept him as well. After some time playing with Eri, the bedroom door in the back opened up, and he could hear Hitoshi talking to someone. The voice sounded a little familiar, but he couldn't place it. Hitoshi moved into the kitchen, retrieving a bottle of water from the fridge and handing it to a blonde boy who was talking to him about something. He assumed it was a movie or show, but the boy talked so animatedly, adding his own sound effects, that even Hisashi was having trouble following. I think you'd like it. The blonde opened the bottle and took a sip. You could come over on the weekend and we could watch it. Sure, that sounds like fun. Hitoshi chewed his lip, and everything immediately clicked into place. This was one of the kids from the ice cream shop all those months ago, wasn't it? Hisashi knew he looked familiar, and if Hitoshi was really anything like Shouta, which they were remarkably similar considering they aren't actually related, then he knew exactly what was going through that kid's mind. Kaminari, are you staying for dinner? Shouta asked. Apparently this wasn't the first time Hitoshi had his friend over. Not tonight, Mr. Aizawa. Mom's been texting me to come home. So, Hisashi spoke up from where he sat with Eri, making both boys jump. They must have not known he had come over. What you boys working on back there? Math homework, Hitoshi stated, matter-of-factly. On a Friday night? I know, it's lame. Kaminari was the one to answer. I'm kinda bad at math, but we got this big test on Monday. Hitoshi is being super nice and helping me study. You're not that bad. Hitoshi turned to him, sounding a little like Shouta when he lectured Hisashi. It just takes you a little more time to figure it out. I think you're really smart, Denki. Thanks, man. Kaminari chuckled, like he was unused to hearing people call him smart. There was a faint pink color to his cheeks. They both ended up looking away at the same time, and Hisashi wanted to giggle at the teenage flirting, but remembered back when he was that age, and even more awkward than them. Out of kindness, he didn't make a comment. Oh, you have a guitar? Kaminari looked just past Hisashi to where the guitar and keyboard were at. They ended up becoming permanent fixtures in the Aizawa household, since both kids used them often. Although Eri didn't stick to the songs that Hisashi picked for her to practice. Instead, she mashed keys until it sounded not as terrible as it could. But as long as she was keeping an interest, Hisashi could work with that. Yeah, it's Sashi's, Hitoshi said. But I've been teaching Joshi how to play it. He's been getting pretty good in the last few weeks. Can I hear? Kaminari turned with pleading eyes at Hitoshi, who looked like he wanted to disappear on the spot. I'm just starting to learn, though. I'm not very good. Come on, I'm sure you're awesome at it. Kaminari rushed over, grabbing the guitar from where it was on the stand, and handed it out to Hitoshi. Hisashi watched with a smile as he took a seat on the couch, Kaminari across from him on the other side, and started plucking a few chords. Eventually he started to play a song, one that Hisashi recognized, but knew for a fact he hadn't taught him. He must have been looking up tutorials online or something, which Hisashi couldn't scold him for since he used to play nearly the same thing as a kid. Oftentimes he would listen to the radio for a few hours to record his favorite songs, then play the tape on one note at a time and try to replicate it to impress people. Shakily he finished playing the last notes of Smoke on the Water. Really a classic to make people think you're cool. Whoa, that's amazing! Kaminari looked as excited as Eri started to clap. Obviously she was proud of her brother and the progress he made. We should start a band. Hitoshi looked a little confused. Yeah, you can play guitar. Actually, you and Tokoyami. I heard he's pretty good too. Kaminari excitedly sat up. Bakugo can play the drums, and Jiro can sing. She didn't like to admit it, but her voice is wicked. What about you? Obviously, I'd be the bass player that everyone's in love with. He smiled brightly, which made Hitoshi laugh. It was actually kind of adorable to watch these kids interact. Hisashi wondered if that's what he and Shouta would have looked like if they somehow met back in high school. But I would need to learn. Kaminari deflated a little. Hey, can you teach me to play bass, Mr. Aizawa? That's the one in the kitchen. Hisashi chuckled. I'm Mr. Yamada. But sure, I can teach you. I'll warn you, though, I've never mastered that one completely, but I can get you started. Want to see me play piano? Eri asked, obviously thinking they were just showing off their skills. Kaminari smiled and agreed. He was a sweet kid, cheering on Eri as she slowly made her way through Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. After a few more moments of talking, eventually he grabbed his backpack from Hitoshi's room and said his goodbyes. Hitoshi held the door open for him as they talked about making plans for next weekend to watch the movie. Once he closed the door, with the promise that Kaminari would text him when he made it home safely. Hisashi waited roughly 10 seconds until he knew there would be no way that he would still be able to hear them in the apartment. So, when are you going to ask him out? Hitoshi's face turned scarlet, while Shouta halted all movements in the kitchen. I don't know what you're talking about. All right. Hisashi held his hands in a mock surrender. I get it, not my place. But, for what it's worth, I know he'll say yes. For a moment, Hitoshi just looked at him, skeptical of the statement, but eventually asked, How do you know? From when we got the ice cream that one time, he made a show about saying, You look like your dad. He pointed at Shouta, who raised an eyebrow. And then, said your dad is hot. No one does that unless they're trying to say they think you're hot. No, Dinky was just... Hitoshi casted his eyes down. He's just friendly to everyone. It doesn't mean anything. If that's what you think, but that's not the impression I got. Eri piped up before anyone else had the chance to respond. Toshi and Dinky sitting in a tree. Eri, don't tease your brother. Shouta scolded from the kitchen. Plus, you are too young to know that. Where did you learn it? School. Eri shrugged, which just made Shouta glare at Hisashi. Don't look at me. Kids pick that up from each other. Hisashi laughed. I need to finish my homework. Hitoshi started back towards his room, but as soon as he approached the hallway, he paused. It was as if he was thinking about something. Hey, Sashi, do you really think he would? I really do. With that, Hitoshi nodded, but headed back into his room. He wasn't sure exactly what he had done, but he was thankful that he was starting to open up a bit more with Hisashi. Shouta often talked about how reserved he was, sometimes talking with him about issues, but mostly he didn't feel comfortable with anyone other than his therapist. This felt like a huge step that Hisashi was grateful for. Ever since Hisashi used the key the first time at Shouta's apartment, it became a habit. Nearly every weekend, he would take the train back to the Aizawa household after work, use his key, and spend time with everyone until he was forced to leave Sunday night. At this point, the only reason why he would leave was because he couldn't bring his entire wardrobe over without feeling like he was encroaching on the family. Hisashi collapsed on the bed, exhausted from the week. Each year, he always loved his kids. They brought a fresh new energy and kept him on his toes. But this particular week was absolutely draining. Between the meetings he had to attend after school, the parents who decided to yell at him for no reason, and planning his observation by administration, he was beyond tired. Do I need to tuck you in as well? Shouta teased as he walked back into the room. He must have just finished with Eri. Only if it comes with a bedtime story. Hisashi smiled into the pillow before nestling into the sheets. Luckily, he had already changed into his pajamas. Shouta moved about the room quietly, changing into his sleep clothes as well before crawling in on the other side. Like a moth to flame, Hisashi wriggled closer and draped himself across Shouta, basking in the warmth for his partner. Pretty much as soon as Shouta gave him a goodnight kiss, did Hisashi fall into a blissful sleep. A tiny voice pulled him out of his dreams. Blinking slightly, Hisashi wasn't sure what time it was. Although the room was covered in darkness, and there was a light snoring coming from next to him. He sat up a little as the noise continued. It took his sleepy mind a few moments to realize it was Eri talking. "Daddy," she whispered, a dark shadow on Shota's side of the bed. "Is everything okay?" Hizashi asked. His voice must have been loud enough to wake Shouta, who stirred awake, sitting up immediately. "What happened?" Hearing her dad's voice must have broke Eri because she started to cry uncontrollably. She mumbled something through her tears. All the words that Hisashi could pick up were dream, bad, and scared. His heart broke for this poor little one. While he had often heard Shouta talk about her nightmares, he hadn't experienced it up until now. Seeing how poorly this girl was treated in her past made Hisashi want to get up in the middle of the night and track down her abuser just so he could beat him up himself. "It's okay, sweetheart. I'm here." Shouta reached out and picked up his daughter, holding her to his chest as she continued to cry. "Do you want me to come tuck you back into bed?" "No." As Hisashi's eyes started to readjust in the dark, he could see her shake her head. "Can I sleep here?" Both of them paused for a moment. Hisashi knew that oftentimes Eri would sleep in bed if she had a really rough nightmares. But since this incident hadn't happened any of the times he was over, they never got a chance to talk about it. He didn't want to put Shouta in an awkward position of either convincing his daughter not to or having to share the bed with someone who wasn't family. Yes, they've been dating for a while, and yes, Hisashi was basically living with them during the weekends, but still, it didn't seem right to be here while Eri was recovering from a nightmare. "Of course you can, Eri." Hisashi spoke up before Shouta had a chance to. "You can have my spot." He got up from bed, stretching a little. "Sashi, where are you going?" Shouta asked. "I'm gonna go sleep on the couch. That way you and Eri can have some privacy." Eri started to sniffle, as it seemed her tears were returning. "You're leaving?" "Don't worry about me, little listener." He reached over and stroked her hair. "I'm just giving you and your dad some room. I'll be here when you wake up in the morning." Eri's crying seemed to renew. Although she didn't say anything else, Hisashi could hear her sniffles. "You don't have to go." Shouta held Eri closer as he spoke. "If you want to, I understand, but you're welcome to stay here." Hisashi thought about it for a moment. He had no issue with staying in the bed with both of them. He just figured that they would want to be together without him. That was an issue he had been trying to work on for the past few months of dating, always assuming he was imposing to those around him. But everyone had shown him time and time again that that wasn't true. They wanted him here, and he wanted to be here. So he crawled back into bed. "Eri, did you want me to stay?" "Don't leave." Her voice was so tiny as she held on to Shouta. "I'm sorry." That made his heart absolutely shatter. In his assumption about himself, he didn't think about how it would affect Eri. She was just a small child. She didn't understand what was happening. Just that she came for help and Hisashi was going to leave. He never wanted her to feel like that again. "Nothing to be sorry for, little one." He scooted closer to wrap both Shouta and Eri in a hug. "We are right here for you. You're safe." They allowed some time to pass, and Eri curled up in her dad's arm until her breathing evened out. It took some careful shuffling to lay her down without waking her, but they managed. Eri was asleep in between the two of them, as Shouta gave her a kiss on her forehead. "Thank you for staying." Shouta reached out and held Hisashi's hand. "I hope you know that Eri already thinks of you as part of this family." "I just wish I could do better by her at times," he admitted, trying to keep his voice low as to not to wake her. "Parenting is a learning curve. You can't be perfect all the time, but eventually you'll figure it out." Hisashi squeezed his hand in lieu of an answer. His students had only been at specials for a couple of minutes when Hisashi's phone started to vibrate. Luckily, he was pretty prepared for tomorrow, so he could afford to answer the call. It was a little surprising to see Shota's name across the screen. "Sho, is everything okay?" Hisashi tried to keep the panic out of his voice, his imagination already running wild with worst-case scenarios. "I'm so glad you answered. I have a huge favor to ask." There was a commotion in the background on his end. There's an emergency at work. Apparently someone is holding people hostage at the bank, and they needed me to learn what is happening so we can publish it for tomorrow's paper. Sounds dangerous? I'll be okay. The press aren't allowed to get that close, but it means I don't know when I'll come home. Could you take Ari and watch the kids until I get there? Someone, it sounded like it could have been Emmy, was trying to get his attention. I know it's a lot to ask, but I don't know what else to do. It's okay. I'll do it. I don't mind. Thank you so much, Sashi. He could hear a sigh of relief. They got off the phone, Shouta promising to call the office and make sure everything was taken care of so Hisashi would be authorized to pick up Eri. The rest of the day passed in a blur. He couldn't help but worry about Shouta the entire time. Hopefully he was staying safe and he would be home soon. At the end of the day, he called Eri's teacher and explained he would be coming back to pick her up as soon as all his kids had been picked up. She was very understanding. Just as the last of his students left with their parents, Principal Nezu walked in with a smile. While Hisashi had worked for him for years, he wasn't particularly close with the man. He was a short man with gray hair and a scar across his right eye. Even though he seemed to always have a smile on his face, there was something about his demeanor that suggested he never did anything without a plan. Mr. Yamada, do you have a moment? It may have sounded like a question, but Hisashi knew it wasn't. Of course. I noticed that you've been added on the authorization to pick up Aizawa. Nezu leaned against one of the desks. That seems a little odd. Can you tell me what's going on? Yeah, I've recently started dating her father. He had an emergency at work and asked me to watch over her until he got home. All sorts of scenes flashed through his mind, that he was about to get fired over this, that there was actually something in his contract he wasn't aware of that forbade this sort of thing. Were you dating him when she was in your class? No, we waited until the year was over, and I knew she wouldn't be my student again. Perhaps Hisashi should have brought this up sooner with Nezu. That makes it easier. The smile had turned a little softer. I'm worried that a parent may come in and complain, but she wasn't your student. Then it doesn't matter. Relief washed over him at hearing those words. You know, when I spoke with Mr. Aizawa at the beginning of the last year, he was worried about Eri being in your class. I'm glad I convinced him to let her stay. I knew you'd be good for her. Nezu patted his arm. I didn't realize that you'd be good for both of them. Assuring him again that Hisashi had done nothing wrong, Nezu excused himself. Hisashi grabbed all his belongings and rushed to the first grade room. He hoped that Miss Kanuski wouldn't be upset that he didn't get there sooner. Sashi! Eri called out, running up to give him a hug. She must have been warned that he was the one coming to get her today. We're learning about space this week. It's so cool. He listened to her ramble a little about all the interesting things they talked about today. Before she got too far into the story, he was able to direct her to gathering all her belongings so they could start to head home. It was a little weird to be on the other end of pickup, but he found he didn't mind too much. Mr. Yamada. Anna gave him a smile. She had always been one of the kindest people at work. He loved the spacesuit costume she had on as well, something simple that the students would remember for a while. I was a little surprised when I got the call that you would be the one to come get her today. He really didn't want to explain the whole thing again, but it seemed like he didn't have much of a choice. Yeah, I've been seeing her dad, and he had a work thing and asked me to come pick her up today. I figured. She chuckled, running a hand through her blue and blonde hair. She talks about you a lot in class. She really cares about you. Harry is a great kid. I care for her too. By the time she walked back up, grabbing his hand, Hisashi was more than ready to head home. Are you gonna cook dinner tonight? She asked innocently. I'm gonna try, but we'll see if I mess it up. Eri giggled. We can make mac and cheese. I'll help. I would love that. Hisashi matched her enthusiasm, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. When he looked back up, he was a little surprised to see Anya looking at them with a fond expression. I'm glad to see you happy. Hisashi had no idea how to respond. Most of his interactions with her was always work-related, So to have someone who was just a co-worker notice how unhappy he was before, and the difference his new family had made was unexpected. I really am. He gave Mary's hand one more squeeze before heading out, listening to her stories of everything that they did at school and cherishing every moment. I'm kind of scared. Okay. One, as I was reading this, right, I realized, specifically when the Nezu came in, which, Nezu, I realized, okay, well, with that solved, what's the conflict? Because the looming conflict this whole time has been, is it actually okay for them to date even, even though Eri is no longer a student? Is the fact of how they met the problem, right? Or is everything good? Everything okay, right? It was like a small little looming thing. And also the problem of, fitting in with the relationship and having kids, but that is, evened out. It's all good. So what is the huge conflict, right? And I was a little worried, but I'm like, okay, maybe it's just going to be fluff from here and the next point. We are kind of close towards the end. I think we only have 2 chapters next. I believe it's just 2 chapters. Yeah, it's just 2 chapters, right? So how horrible can things go in 2 chapters, right? Right? Things can't go that bad in 2 chapters. And then I see the notes, the author's notes at the end. Next chapter, we're going back to the conflict of it all. So stay tuned. Kudos and comments are always appreciated. What do you mean? Wicked writer? What do you Wicked writer? What are you doing? What do you mean? Wicked writer? What is this? Explain. Wicked writer, you can't do this to me. You can't do this to us. What? Wicked writer, why? Wicked writer, what are you doing? Wicked writer, do you not love us? Wicked writer, why are you doing this to us? Well, I'm gonna scroll a little bit and I'm gonna read what's it called? The first thing I see, right? Bastard. Shota's head snapped forward. The last person he said, oh. Okay. Ooh, okay, I realized what could go wrong. I thought it was maybe gonna be Shouta with him not coming back home and not seeing him back home safe. I thought, oh, something's gonna happen to Shouta. We kind of forgot about someone. Oh god. How did I forget about that one conflict that was looming over them the whole time? Oh shit. Oh fuck. I'm gonna cry. I'm gonna sob. I'm gonna puke. I'm gonna throw up. I'm gonna projectile vomit. Sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm like Izuku in that point where I start just babbling on. I'm still babbling on right now. I'm nervous, so I'm like just babbling, and I'm word vomiting, just word vomit, blah, 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 word vomit, like Izuku Midoriya and his mumbling, but except my word vomit is weird because it's not just continuous blah, 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 mumbling. It's like obviously I'm mumbling and then I stop and I think for a second and then I go back, but I don't really think. It's just stop, I breathe, and then I go back into what I was saying, There's no really stops and breaths, but there is weird pauses because I don't know how to pronounce a word, or I don't know how to say a word, or I mispronounce a word, and I'm gonna stop now. I'm gonna stop. I'm nervous. I'm sorry. I'm shaking. As always, my raindrops, make sure to eat, sleep, drink water, take your meds. Have a wonderful day or night. Link to my Discord server and socials are down in the description. Subscribe to see more of my content, and thank you so much for watching.